All right, well, here we are again one last time. Give me a couple of weeks off from doing new lectures, and it seems like I forget how to do everything. But this is it. I hit the record button. I was sure I was going to forget at least one class that I wanted to record, but yeah, here we are. So far, so good. So we've most recently been talking about interviews. My presentation about that was a little while back now, but last time, at least most of us did peer interviews. So we talked about various things about interviews. That for the programs, it's number one about recruiting and only number two about evaluation, and they're likely to accept most of their interviewees in most cases. My advice included just, consider what you want to know still about being there, about the labs, about the program, about living there, and also to do your homework regarding anyone you're scheduled to meet with, especially any faculty that appear on your interview schedule or that you think you're likely to talk to during your interview. Do a little homework on their research ahead of time. So today we're shifting gears, and this is, I think, very naturally the last topic that we're going to cover in this course. And the idea today is that we're stepping forward a little bit in time. For some of you, we might be stepping forward a few months. For others of you, we might be stepping forward a few years. But the premise of today's class is that you've already submitted your applications, you've already done multiple interviews, and you've been accepted by two or more of the programs that you were interested in. So that's kind of what we're assuming to start with today. So this is how to choose a program, and choice implies, I guess, at least two options. So, that's what we're going to be assuming here. And so, even though you've been accepted, in some cases, there might still be a visit to do. So like in the case of our program, and I think probably a growing number of programs, interviews actually happen online. And yet programs realize that most prospective students would really appreciate being able to visit the place if they're not familiar with it. And so what we do is, if we accept students, then, and at least if they're in North America and we can afford to do this, then we fly them out here, and and they stay here at our expense for a couple of days, and we have some further programming that is really oriented around making sure they have the information they want, making sure they have a good sense of campus and the community, because that ends up being a very low pressure visit for the students. I mean, they have a decision to make, but they're not being evaluated at all, really, at that point. So that may still be a feature. So these visits probably would most often happen in March. So after interviews, but before decisions get made. And in addition to the possibility of in-person visits, if they have not occurred yet, you might also have additional outreach toward you in more of a virtual sense, emails in particular, and you might hear from both program staff and faculty that you might be working with. It's hard to say, especially with faculty. Like, as I've emphasized, we're all different. And and some of us are too busy to even think of such things, but you might hear from faculty, hoping to make sure that you have all the information that you need about their lab, or if there's anything else they can do to help you in your decision process. So this is definitely something that happens to some degree with our program, and so you might expect at least some additional contacts after acceptance. And then in the end, you'll need to make a decision. And one thing that's probably a lucky thing for someone in your situation is that in general, most programs have the exact same deadline for you to decide by. And there's even this big group of universities that has collectively agreed that none of their programs will pressure prospective students for decisions about which graduate program to join prior to April 15th. And so this will often be a pretty set timetable, at least for PhD programs. So at least you don't have to worry generally about like different programs asking you for different things in terms of the timing of your decision. All right, so that's kind of big picture, and the other thing that is truly obvious, but I just wanted to acknowledge, is that I can't really tell you how to make this decision, and it really does depend very much on your individual priorities and how you weight things. All I could do is to offer some potential suggestions. So what might be considered? A lot of these things you might guess, but sometimes it can help to hear it out loud. And I'm going to step through each of these things in turn as we go through the rest of our class session. So obviously, you might be thinking about the specific labs that you might work with at any of your potential options, any of the PhD programs you might join. And you might also be thinking about other characteristics of these programs, including their structure and requirements. You might consider the professional development opportunities that university and program offers. There's also the financial side of things in terms of having stable funding for students and what that entails. And the living allowance that they provide and how that compares to the cost of living, and additional benefits as well. And of course, you're also considering where you want to live for the next 5 or 6 years. And that's an important consideration as well. So starting at the top of that list, obviously a pretty central consideration in this whole equation is just which labs you might join, and thus which specific faculty you might be working closely with over the next 5 or 6 years. That certainly has a big impact, in terms of your development as a scientist, and just even beyond that, like how things go for you over the next several years. So and one consideration too is just number, as I've highlighted in previous class sessions in terms of identifying where to apply. I do suggest having more than one potential lab home where you might be happy to end up, and that the principal investigator is at least potentially interested in considering you for joining their lab. And I mean, this is probably most obvious in the case of an offer to join a program and do rotations. Obviously, you'd like to have, 3 labs you're actually interested in to rotate with, and labs that might, be plausible homes for you. But even in the case of direct admit scenarios, I still think that this is a relevant consideration and worth prioritizing. Because, even if you know whose lab you're going to join, well, there's 2 things. One is that you'll ultimately have a PhD committee of perhaps 5 faculty, and some of those could be people with somewhat distinct skill sets to what you actually want to study. But, it might also be helpful to have 1 or 2 faculty with research interests pretty close to yours, beyond your major advisor. And so that's a consideration, but there's also the possibility that you might need to change labs. Now, most PhD students don't, but a decent minority do. And that could be for multiple reasons. It could be because they're not happy in their initial lab. And often that does relate to the relationship with the faculty member. Or it can be something other than that. It could be that the faculty member has decided to leave the university and take a job somewhere else, either somewhere in academia, and maybe the students don't all want to move, or it could be a non-academic position where there isn't a lab to move with, really. And so, this could be another reason why someone might need to switch labs. And another reason why, you might ideally want to be joining a program where you're not like joining the only lab that you could really envision working with at that whole institution. So, that's probably still worth, some important consideration. Beyond that, in terms of the individual labs that you're considering, there are definitely multiple factors to keep in mind. I've been emphasizing the relationship with the primary advisor, and I know that's kind of a hard thing to assess when you've had somewhat limited interactions with someone, between email and video calls, and initially that might be it. But you do have the opportunity to ask them questions about their expectations for students and how they approach mentoring. And so, it's worth doing that. And it's worth just, considering, how have you felt about the interactions you've had so far with that professor? And of course, you're not just signing up to work with a professor, you're also joining a lab, which generally has other full-time members. And so, it's worth considering, like, what is the composition of that lab? How big is it? And who are the specific people in that lab? Have you had a chance to interact with them? If you feel like it would help you, you can pursue the opportunity to interact with them further. Like usually if you're in this decision process, and you ask the professor if they would be open to facilitating some individual or group meetings between you and the other lab members, they would generally be very happy to do that, because they realize that it could be important in your decision process. They're probably interested in encouraging you to choose their program. So, that should generally be an option, and it can be very informative, and it can also help you to get more of a sense of what it's like to work with that professor by talking with the lab members. Obviously, one key consideration is, just, the closeness of match between the research in that lab and what you would like to be doing. I think different faculty different faculty look at grad student projects in different ways. Some might be in a situation where there are certain projects that they really need to have done. And others might be more open-minded and really prioritize letting the student, have a lot of input or even developing their own novel ideas for projects, either right away or maybe after an initial project, to give more time for that process to play out. But I think it's probably important to just about any faculty member to have, good synergy between, between a given student's research in their lab and the rest of what the lab's doing. Otherwise faculty are going to feel like they're spread too thin, and their lab is not as dynamic as it could be. So that's worth considering. And you can even just take a look at like, well, what has this lab been doing? I mean, unless it's a brand new lab, in which case, you could look at what the new professor did in their postdoc, and that's, mostly it. Although I've mentioned that it can actually be a good situation sometimes to join a new lab. But otherwise it's worth keeping an eye on what they've been doing and making sure they've been at least, moderately productive in terms of publishing. And I think maybe the thing to avoid, at least for an established lab, it's, or at least to be wary of, is to join a lab that where across multiple years, it seems like there's not a lot that's coming out of that lab primarily. That would be something to look for. And by that lab primarily, I mean papers where the professor is the last author usually, or like a co-corresponding author for a collaborative study, or otherwise lab members in that lab playing a leading role, like being first author or co-first author on something. And I also mentioned, in our previous coverage of evaluating labs, that you can also try to get a sense of what former members of that lab have gone on to do as well. At least if it's a lab that's been around for a while. And lastly, it might be worth considering what sort of research skills you would like to gain during your PhD and the extent to which you could pick them up in any given lab in light of their own expertise. It is possible to pick up skills that do not currently exist in your lab, but it definitely requires a little bit more independence and effort from the student. Next, having already talked about the lab side of things, there are a range of other considerations in terms of the program and the broader campus research environment. One question which doesn't really have a right answer that we have brought up before is whether you feel like either a very broad umbrella sort of program or else a more kind of subfield focused program better fits what you're looking for in terms of the scope and the like the incoming class size. That's one possible consideration. You definitely want to look at the structure and requirements of a given program. So like, what courses are required, what else is required? Are you, do you feel like that aligns with the training experience that you are looking for? That can also be worth considering, and it can vary for certain, between one program and another. And on the culture side, hopefully you're getting a chance to interact with current students from that program. And, it's worth trying to get a sense of, how life seems to be treating them there. Probably, anywhere you consider, like, some of the students might be feeling pretty busy some of the time. But, if it seems like life is really grinding them down, if there, is not an especially positive culture among them that you can perceive, then that's worth keeping in mind, and that may reflect elements of the broader culture, and especially, the training experience towards students. So, that's another factor to just have on your radar. And, it can also be worth considering in terms of the research environment, things that are beyond the lab and even the program itself, but that might be relevant to the research that you're interested in doing. Like, are there certain core facilities that could benefit your work, by allowing some research tasks to be basically outsourced and to provide expertise that might not even exist in the lab itself? Or are there certain like computational resources that are important for the work that you would like to do? What's available? That may vary from one place to another. Next, I mentioned professional development opportunities. And so it could be worth asking or doing your own online research in terms of what is offered. It might not even be through a particular program. It might often be at kind of a larger, like a higher level, like at a graduate school level. What sort of professional development opportunities are offered right there on campus, like workshops, that are oriented towards specific, I guess, developing specific skills or towards preparing for specific careers. And, in terms of the research itself, are there things like, it's worth considering courses in this regard, but it's also worth considering other options. Like, let's say you'd really like to learn computer programming as a grad student. Well, are there kind of established ways to do that, or is it just kind of on your own? Like, are there certain courses that are relevant for the computational skills that help biologists? Or are there other workshops or even, student-led groups that have a focus on that area? Or, depending on your specific career goals, like if you feel like there's a strong chance that you would like to veer into the private sector after your PhD, what sort of built-in opportunities exist at this university? So, like, are there mechanisms set up where, there are already connections between the university and local private companies? And, is there a supportive attitude toward students doing like a brief internship even during their PhD? That can happen. And there can be other opportunities as well. Like at this university, there is a group that is really led by graduate students and postdocs that basically, does little consulting projects for companies and interacts with them extensively to kind of build their network and get a better sense of what companies want. And alternatively, if your interests were more teaching oriented, let's say, what sort of, pedagogical development could you find at this university? What sort of, let's say, workshops or courses in teaching or mentoring are offered there? And are there opportunities to actually have teaching experiences that are a little bit deeper and more meaningful than your typical TA-ship, where, you might be kind of running a lab section with a very established curriculum, or, or TAing in a lecture class and doing a fair bit of grading. Those experiences have some value, but if what you really want to do is teaching, at least in a large component in your career, then you need to seek out experiences that go beyond that, where you have more of a creative role in the teaching process. And the best time to do that is absolutely during your PhD. Otherwise, and this could apply to all different career tracks. It doesn't, it doesn't have to mean that you're specifically pursuing a science communication focused career. But even if you're not, even if you want to become a professor, or even if you want to go into industry, communication skills can be very important in terms of driving career outcomes. And so if you feel like there are things that you would like to to get better at, whether it's writing or speaking in front of people, what sort of opportunities exist at this university to build your skills in those areas? Questions so far? Okay. So next up, the money part of things. So there's a few different elements here. One is just, how are you going to stay funded? Some programs will, flat out say, we guarantee that you will always be funded. But not every university can do that. In some cases, you might get, kind of a more generally assuring response, but like we've never had a lapse in funding or something like that, because you can't always predict the future. Like if some cataclysm happens, 2 or 3 years from now. But it's worth knowing, like, in this program or in your specific situation that you're considering, how is it likely that you would be supported? And in particular, like how often might you be serving as an RA, maybe supported by a research assistant, supported by your primary advisor's grants, versus serving as a teaching assistant, and that being, basically, what provides for your stipend, benefits, and tuition remission. So it's worth knowing, like, when you serve as a teaching assistant, usually that's like 20 hours a week. Well, it can be a positive experience, but it's also 20 hours a week you can't spend on other things. So it depends on individual interests in part, and it depends on the field. In some fields, this is just what you generally have to do. In other fields, it's more variable. But it's worth asking into that and knowing what to expect. And any PhD program should be offering you a stipend, which is the living allowance. And so it's definitely worth considering whether that's a budget that can work for you. And so in many cases it can work, I would say. Like, in the case of our program, and multiple other programs on this campus, we've just decided to increase our stipend to 36,000 for next year. That's an annual stipend. And so obviously the people in this room, you already live in Madison and have some sense of how far that gets you. And so, the hope would be that in most places, their stipend would offer a similar, standard of living as what that offers here in Madison. In some places, like in the most expensive places, it could be a little bit more dicey, because it might be hard for a program to offer you everything you would need to live with that identical standard of living, let's say in Manhattan or Bay Area, California, or Seattle, or the most expensive places. And so it's worth considering the financial side of things, taking a specific look at apartment rents for places that are at where you could at least reasonably get to campus, like by bike or bus. Often car is not a great option on a regular basis. I can't Off the top of my head, I can't think of graduate students I've known here who have had parking passes on this campus, and that's probably often much the same in other places, just as, for cost reasons. I don't even have a parking pass here, but that's by choice. So, yeah, so, there are various tools out there to kind of compare cost of living. There are a couple of cost of living calculators out there that you could look up. There's also a site that lists, what's called a living wage for, like, what is on average, what does a single person need, for example, to live in a particular location in the US. In Madison, actually, what they list is very close to 36,000. So we're kind of just getting there with the recent $2,000 increase that we've approved. It's worth considering how the finances seem to play out for any given offer you've got. And it's certainly worth clarifying too, what else they are providing to you, what the health and dental and vision care, and what other benefits they offer, and whether that, differs much from place to place. I think there should generally be health insurance offered. You might need to pay some kind of monthly premium. That is the case here. And of course, I think that certainly everyone in this room is very familiar with segregated fees. Sometimes a sore spot for students at UW especially. But that can vary, definitely does vary from place to place. And so, it's worth kind of factoring that into the whole financial equation as well. And then the last thing, that I think is really worth considering is whether you think you'd like living in a given place. So, like, to give an example, when I was trying to decide on a graduate program, I was trying to decide between two places in very different locations. One of them was Cornell, which is in a very small town in upstate New York and notable for its gorges and waterfalls. And the other one was the University of Chicago, which is kind of like on the somewhat near south side of Chicago, so a very large city. And I was and still am a very outdoor oriented person, and wasn't quite sure, especially at that point in my life. I didn't have a whole lot of experience being in large cities, and I wasn't sure if that was a place I would like living or not. And one of the faculty who was trying to recruit me there said, well, if you don't like living here, that'll just motivate you to finish faster. Did I already tell you that story? Hopefully not. That wasn't very convincing to me. So it's worth considering, it really is. And I think I've emphasized this before as well, which is, a PhD takes a while. And so, we're hopefully talking about less than 10% of your entire life, but it's not a trivial slice either. And so it really is worth considering, like, what sort of place, is going to be a place you'll enjoy living. And, you also, you need that partly even just to, to stay motivated and positive toward, this epic thing you're taking on and doing a PhD, where, the research doesn't always go well. Other things don't always go well. And so it really helps if you're in a place that's gonna, help in terms of keeping you happy and motivated. I do think it is important to actually make sure you get a chance to go there. And like, one visit that I had, I think, I think they'd had to move the location where they were having students stay, or prospective students stay. They had to move it kind of off campus. It was usually at like an on-campus hotel, and they hadn't really budgeted any time. And this was going to be my only visit there. They hadn't really budgeted any time for for interviewees to look around. And so, this was probably a bit daring on my part, and it could have backfired. But during one time block, when all they wrote on our schedule was just like go to the department seminar because everyone else was busy at the department seminar. I actually decided not to go to it, and I just I took the chance to walk around. It was a little bit awkward because the person that I was meeting with immediately before turned out to be the brother of the person giving the seminar. but he was nice about it anyway. He was understanding. Yeah, but in general, it's not a good idea to skip interview events for the sorts of reasons that I mentioned a few weeks ago. But it is important to find some way to have some time to figure out, if this is an area that you think you would like. Although, like way back then, like year 2000, I think was before there was any like Google Maps Street Views. There's definitely more you can do these days to get a sense of an area. I don't know if there was even a YouTube at that time. Obviously there's a lot more options now, but I think it's still worth, making sure you have some in-person time to explore. And so, I'm going to say a little bit more about location factors. There's, obviously a lot that you might consider, and it is very individual. But for many people, it could make a difference how easy it is to visit family and or friends from that location. How many hours does it take to go see whoever? For some, there might be strong preferences in terms of the weather that they would have in a particular place, or, whether it's like mountains or coastline or whatever. Relatedly, the recreation options, which vary dramatically from one person to the other, what you like to do for fun and whether this is a good place for it. Also there can be cultural factors in terms of the broader community, not just like, the graduate program and the campus, but do you feel like some places are better than others for you in terms of the broader social environment, or are there places you are more or less comfortable for, political reasons or related aspects of social culture? Or are there specific, local groups that you would like to interface with, beyond the university itself that might be more available in some locations than others? I have to be very general here, of course, because this may mean very different things for different people. It can all be worth considering. For some people, the food options might be a meaningful consideration, whether it's where you shop or, the range of, cuisines that you can find in local restaurants or food carts, or what you can find immediately around campus. It could be a nice little lifestyle perk if you're happy with that side of things. It's also worth considering, how good are the options for getting around? How transit friendly is this community, or walk friendly or bike friendly? If having a car is important to you, how easy is that here? And so on. All right. Any questions before I get into my last little bit today? Yes. It's definitely worth applying to fellowships, even if you have an otherwise guaranteed source of funding. There are multiple positives there. Even the experience of applying can be a real positive skill builder, in terms of increasing your experience in applying for any sort of funding. So, that's a plus, but also if you get it, there are multiple positives there. One is that it might increase your independence. So if you don't need to be paid off a particular research grant of your advisors, then maybe that opens up some options in terms of what you could work on. Another thing is just that, it's an honor that you can put on your CV. And it's a positive thing in that regard too. Some fellowships might also have a stipend that's even higher than the base one in your program. That really depends. But that can be the case in some cases. So, it might offer a little bit of extra financial flexibility for your personal budget too. So yeah, I definitely, would be positive toward that. I think those are some of the positives for the student. It could definitely benefit the lab as well. Maybe if a student in this lab gets a fellowship, maybe that allows that lab to to bring in another student or someone in a different role. Now, depending on the size of the lab, that might be a positive or it might not. Usually that might be a good thing, but if it's already a really big lab, then hard to say in terms of professor attention. But it can only be a good thing for the lab to free up funds for other things. So certainly, as a professor, it's sort of like Christmas if my student gets a 3-year fellowship, because then I enter that into my lab budget and it's like, wow, I have money for other things now. But I think there are definitely some real pluses for the students as well. All right, so the last thing is that I've thrown out all of these varied potential considerations for you, and the real challenge might be well, how do you integrate all of that and actually make a decision? And what works best for you might be different than what works best for me or someone else. But I thought I would share one approach that I've used in complex decisions, which is a little bit to something I've heard called force field analysis. To be honest, I've never really looked into that itself. I've only just kind of possibly reinvented something similar to it. So basically, this is a way to kind of, measure your own priorities. So, what this involves is to try to list out distinct factors that are important to you in making this decision. So first, list the relevant factors to you, and then decide how important each of them are. So put a number next to each of them that seems to you to reflect how important each of those factors are to you. It doesn't really matter what numerical scale you use, whatever you want. And then, when I say quantify how well each choice fits that factor, what I mean there is basically for each of the graduate programs that you're considering, give them a score. Again, with whatever numerical scale you like, that seems to indicate, how well that option, that program choice, fits you in terms of this specific factor. So, picture kind of a grid where you've got the programs, you've got your factors, and you're giving each of them a score in each category. And then basically, you multiply the program scores by the weights for each factor, and then sum those products. So I'll give you an example. So then and you sum up the products of those of those factor weight times program score calculations. So for each program, you sum the products of their score times weight for each of the factors, sum across the factors. I'll show you an example. This is an example of a hypothetical faculty member who is deciding between faculty position offers at the University of Wisconsin and Penn State. Yeah, I'm being kind of silly about that, but yeah, so this is something I actually used when I was trying to figure out whether I wanted to come here or go there. And you might, given that you're here, you might say, well, why was that even a challenging decision? But it's something I really felt like I had to think through carefully, and in partnership with my wife, of course. So there were a range of things that were important to us, and we assigned different weights to them, weighted our careers equally. And then for each of, for the Wisconsin option and the Penn State option, basically, gave them a certain number of points. And in this case, what I decided to do is to use a scale going up to a maximum of 10 for the weight on each factor. And for each of those factors, I kind of, and you don't have to do this, it's not a necessary property of the analysis. Because I just had two here, I ended up kind of splitting 10 points between them for each factor. And so then what I would do to kind of calculate up a total is to multiply, for Wisconsin, let's say, weight by the weight for near family friends by its score for near family and friends. So that's 15 here. And then 3 times 4 is 12. And then you end up summing like 15 and 12 and these other 4 products. And that ultimately apparently got up to 209, unless something went horribly wrong in the spreadsheet. So I did the same thing for Penn State, and that got me up to a slightly lesser score. And lo and behold, here I am. This can be a useful thing to do. But it's also useful, I think, because this doesn't have to be an absolute decision maker. I think, one thing that this can help with is just, the question of, well, given that you see a result in front of you, how do you feel about that result? And if you don't like that result, well, why not? And what's not being considered here to the extent that you want? It can be useful, even if it's not being used as a simple decision metric. So that's why I thought I would put that out there as, a potential tool to use in making a complex decision like this one. All right. Any questions at this point? So, sadly or not, I'm kind of excited for all of you, whether you're applying right now or not. This is our last meeting of the semester. We're not doing anything in person during exam week. And we don't, we only have one more bit of assigned work that is due, and that is our end of the semester survey. So just like at the beginning of the semester where you all filled out this Google form pre-survey, now there is a post-survey, and that's listed on campus under assignments. You can get to the link from there. So that is available now. And I would even encourage you, since we're ending like 25 minutes early, to even just take this opportunity, assuming you have a digital device with you, to go after it now, and then you wouldn't even have to worry about it later. So there are points for this. It's part of the whole class participation, and it's something that I really value in terms of getting your feedback to try to assess how useful you found this course. and to figure out, how I could potentially make it even better. But I'm really happy with how things went this semester, especially being a brand new course that's unlike anything I've ever done before or even heard of. I think that, you've been a really great group. I think you've had amazing questions along the way. And having gotten to know you a little bit, like through your statements, like I said, I'm really excited to see what you do next. I am, really impressed by, all that you've, expressed about your scientific goals. And, I am very curious, to see where you end up. And that's why I asked even in this forum, even about, is there a way that I could bug you in the future to, figure out where you've ended up? Since UW has made the unfortunate decision to slash your email access, like, I don't know, the day you graduate or something like that, and not even forward your email thereafter. So anyway, it would be great if I could still be able to, to know, what your kind of, what your PhD outcome is, whether that's now or down the line. I definitely would love to be able to know that. So again, thank you for being a great group. And, for the rest of today's time, I would love to give you some dedicated survey time here. All right. Thanks, everyone.